District 7 on the San Antonio City Council. And I'm entering my 5th year on, or completing my 5th year on council. And during the second budget process that I participated in, I believe that was 2018 for the 2019 fiscal year, one of the requests I made was funding for a corridor plan, a study along Bandera Road. And ever since then, Rudy and team have been working on this. They can tell you more of the history. The reason I requested that was twofold. One, I heard before coming into office, I heard from many, many constituents that Bandera Road was one of their greatest sources of frustration, the traffic. And as you may know, the city of San Antonio does not manage Bandera Road. It is actually managed by TechStock. So there's really only so much we can do about it. So I spoke with TechStock, and they picked up a traffic study on it again. So TechStock is doing that work. And the reason I asked for this funding was to complement that work. So while TechStock looks at the traffic engineering, this study will look at what's happening just beyond the road. Because if I heard anything from constituents, it wasn't just about the road, but the things along the road as well. And that's why I'm involved with this. And I'm glad to see us at this point. So as I mentioned, the planning department with City of San Antonio has collaborated with TechStock to form an inventory of options to present to the whole community and solicit feedback. The team will also tell you all the different types of outreach and stakeholder input we've done until now. And one of the pieces of information that was collected as part of the TechStock study was a list of 11 potential street connections and widening concepts. These potential connections were included in the plan because they could be a solution to some of the traffic issues on Bandera. Note, there are significant trade-offs should we pursue some of these solutions. There would be a lot we'd have to give up. So these trade-offs merit discussion in the community. So just to clarify, these are simply concepts. They are not what we would call a project that we're looking funding for. They would require much, much further study before that would happen. So keep in mind that what we're doing today is all part of the planning process. And this plan is in draft form, and we are here to converse exclusively with neighborhood leaders before we go out to the public. So thank you for joining us. And I am going to turn it back over to, I believe it's Josh at this time.
Yes, Councilwoman, thank you. And thank you, Linda, for getting this kicked off. Good evening, everyone. My name is Joshua Jaski. I'm a senior planner with the City of San Antonio Planning Department, and I'm the project manager for the Bandera Road Corridor Plan. I want to thank you all tonight for joining us. I want to thank particularly the District 7 and District 8 offices for joining as well. As we prepare for our larger community-wide meeting on August 24th, which is going to be held at City Church Bandera Road, like the Councilwoman said, we thought it would be a great opportunity to present some of the key points of the plan directly to you in hopes that you could help us spread the word and seek input from your respective organizations. Just to recap, as some of you may know, there are 2 coordinated studies taking place on Bandera Road. The one that we're here to discuss tonight, of course, is the City of San Antonio-led planning initiative known as the Bandera Road Corridor Plan. The other study is a Texas Department of Transportation study known as the State Highway 16 Bandera Road Feasibility Study. And just to provide a little bit more detail, while they occupy roughly the same planning area, and that's illustrated by the map on the right of the screen, the 2 initiatives take different approaches with an aim to accomplish common goals, increasing safety, increasing multimodal transportation options, and relieving traffic congestion. The TechStock study will redesign the roadway, including traffic lanes, pedestrian improvements, and keep in mind again that Bandera Road is a state highway, so there's really a limited amount of ability for the city to influence the Bandera roadway proper. The City of San Antonio Bandera Road Corridor Plan creates a future land use plan. It makes recommendations for development patterns, pedestrian and bike projects, as well as the roadway concepts for further study that the Councilwoman mentioned. So this leads us to a progress update. And as I mentioned before, the corridor plan is complete and we are now in the process of soliciting feedback. As part of this phase, we'll be hosting that public meeting at City Church Bandera Road on the 24th. And you can find more information on the project website, www.sanantonio.gov/planning. When you click on the Bandera Road banner, it'll be on the first part of the page, so you can't miss it. You should also be receiving a mailed invitation to the event sometime this week, so please spread the word once you receive it. Your input's vital to the planning process, and as the draft plan is reviewed and comments are reviewed and collected, we'll be working on updates to reflect that feedback, not only collected from today's meeting and the final public meeting, but throughout the public input process, which again ends on August 31st. Once the public input period is concluded, we'll begin presenting at the Planning Commission, Planning Committee, and then City Council for adoption this fall. The Bandera Road Corridor Plan report is structured the following way. It includes 6 areas: proposed future land use plan, preferred development patterns, transportation and neighborhood connectivity, cost and fiscal impacts, public input summary, and design appendices. The design appendices also include technical reports for innovative strategies and best practices in planning, as well as sustainability and equity related best practices that could be employed on the corridor in the future. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jay Louden, and he's going to give us a little bit more detail on some of those sections that I touched on before. If you have any questions, please input them into the chat box, and at the conclusion of the presentation, we'll return to those. Please keep in mind, you can also leave your comments directly to me, joshua.jaeschke@sanantonio.gov, or on the project website, which I mentioned before. Jay?
Thank you, Josh. So as Josh mentioned, my name is Jay Louden. I am a consultant to the City of San Antonio, leading up the effort for the design team. So I wanted to take a minute and introduce things by talking about where we are in the process, what a plan like this is, and also how your comments will affect the plan. So first of all, we are very much in a draft state with this plan. The plan has not been adopted, and nothing that you will see here is finalized. This is an opportunity for you to comment, and as they have all along, your comments are going to change the plan. Second, there are parts of the plan, like the future land use plan, which form a part of the city's planning framework when they're adopted by City Council, which is down the road a fair ways. There are other parts of the plan, like the transportation section, that really just make recommendations for future study and potential projects that could be looked at. So we make those recommendations because they could lead to solutions to problems which we've observed or which people have told us about. But that isn't to say that it is okay with every possible solution, and that is exactly the input that we would like to hear, that we need to hear. So last, please keep in mind that there's a huge difference between a plan, like what we're talking about here today, and an actual project. So nothing here is a project. This is all kind of like a 30,000-foot view of what could happen. So nothing has been budgeted and nothing has been designed or engineered or anything like that. There's only potential, and it's public input that will help determine whether the city advances public discussions about or studies of potential projects. So I want to close this introduction to the process by recognizing that we've heard from some folks that they're upset about the potential for roadway network additions in particular. So I want you to know that that's very important for us to hear. It's very important for us and for city staff and elected officials to hear about what you find both hopeful and concerning and why. And I can promise you that it affects the trajectory of what the city does. But we have to have these discussions, like the councilwoman said, and to hear from a wide cross-section of the community so that we have that understanding. We're going to use a tool called Mentimeter today to capture some of that feedback. And some of you may remember that from some of our other public meetings. So it's an online survey tool that lets us see feedback from everybody in real time. It works on smartphones or on your computer, and it's very easy to use. So the first thing we're going to do is test it. If you're watching this on your computer, I would suggest using your smartphone if you've got one for Mentimeter. But you can also use your computer's web browser if you would rather. Just be sure to open up a new tab. If you go back to the previous slide, although I see some of you are catching on already. Same thing for those of you watching on your smartphones. You can open up a new browser tab, or you could use a tablet or a computer if you've got one available. So go to the web address that you see on the screen, www.menti.com. And I'll say that slowly again and spell that out. So that's www.menti.com. www.menti.com. That's www.menti.com. So once you've got that page pulled up, enter the code that you see on the screen here into the box. And that code is 91811117. That is 91811117. So enter that code and hit submit, and then you'll see a page with these same login instructions. So we're going to pause here for a bit to make sure that we get everybody hooked up correctly with Menti. If you've got any questions, please type them into the chat on Zoom, and we can follow up with you to make sure that you get connected. We completely understand if you're unable to or you don't want to participate in the polling today. That's absolutely fine. We just encourage you to go to the website, and we'll give the link to the website again a couple more times and provide responses there. And we'll give you that link, as I said. So we've got 2-3 folks hooked up now. We'll give this a few more minutes. And Linda, I think we can go ahead to the next slide. So I've got something more entertaining to talk about than very slowly changing numbers. All right, we've got 4 in now. So the test question, we always do a quick test just to make sure that people are hooked up with the technology. So this is the very important question of who is your favorite Spurs player? So please choose your favorite and hit submit. I confess that I chose these options. I apologize if your actual favorite Spurs player is not on the list. I know that there are a lot of great ones. So we're just kind of using this as a gauge to make sure that people are okay with the technology, and also to be sure that we kind of get a final count of how many folks are hooked up here. It looks like we've got 7 right now. Give this another minute or two. I included as one of the options in my draft of this the name of a guy named Reini Lockman, I believe, in honor of my father, because I want to put together the draft of this. University of Kansas, where my father went to school, had just won the NCAA championship, and he is the Spur with the University of Kansas graduate Spur with the most played games, which is all of 61 games. I guess they've not had much luck.
Goodness.
Yeah. All right, looks like 8 folks. Thanks, that's great. We're going to go ahead and move on from here. So our next slide is contact information. We would love it if you share your contact information if you're associated with a neighborhood group, Wood Council district you're in, an organization that you're associated with. This won't be visible to anybody else. It just goes into a buffer on the back end that we'll log so that we know how to contact you, most importantly, and who we've got. So we'll hang out here for a little bit here to make sure you've got time to type that in. Again, this won't show up on the screen. The rest of the input questions that we'll be asking as we go along, you will actually, just like the Spurs player poll, you'll see answers in real time, but this is just hidden on the back end for our purposes. If you are not connected to Menti and you'd like to provide that information, please feel free to put that into the chat as well. That's very helpful for us to know who is on, especially if you've got a screen name here that you know, we can't translate into a name. Vidal, thank you. Vidal Rodriguez. I see you have figured out the note-taking function. Just another minute or two here. All right. I think we're good. If someone has captured Mr. Rodriguez's information, we should clear that screen. All right. So the heart of the plan is the proposed future land use plan. This plan establishes broad categories of land use, which the city will use as a tool in evaluating zoning in the future. There's a lot of detail here, so we can't go through everything individually, but the basic ideas are pretty simple. Here's how it works. So everything in yellow is a single family neighborhood, and nothing changes with those. Second, most of the property along Bandera Road is currently zoned exclusively commercial. There's no mixed use allowed along the corridor right now. So the new plan changes that by adopting new mixed use categories, and those are the purples and the blues that you see. This was a major point of public input. People were very interested in seeing mixed use along the corridor, and we have done that. The areas circled and labeled numbers 1 through 4 are important intersections along the corridor. Those areas are a transition to mixed use, just like the majority of the properties directly along the corridor, with the larger areas among those, which are 1, 2, and 4, receiving specialized designations, and that allows emphasis on incorporating employment and residential centers. So one note on this graphic, because this is a City of San Antonio study, it does not include information for the City of Leon Valley and the City of Helotes. Those cities have their own land use planning. So on to the next slide, and this is our first survey question. So pull out your smartphone or otherwise pull up Mentimeter again, and I'll remind you, you can access the polling feature by going to www.menti.com and entering the code 91811117, and that information is also in the chat if you need it. So here's the question. We heard time and again during our work that incorporating mixed use and focusing development in several areas was important. So the question is, how well do you think the plan does that? And this survey question will allow you to change on this graph, whether that's very well or not well. So go ahead and input your answer if you would. And if you got any questions about this, please go ahead and enter that into the chat. And I'll remind you as we wait for folks to, Philip, I'm not seeing the graph. Looks like we're having some issues with the poll there. Linda, any insight on that? I'm not sure what's going on.
Not either, because I'm showing that it's showing that I should be able to show the results, but it's not letting me show the results.
Okay.
I don't know. Sorry. No.
Trying to get into the back end here.
It's not, no, sorry. Go back.
In the meantime, for those of you on Zoom and not just on the phone, we really love to get the feedback that you have. So let's do this. In the chat, if you could enter a number between 1 and 4, 1 being not well, you feel like the plan does not accomplish things well, and 4 being very well, you feel like it accomplishes the goals that you see on screen very well. Appreciate it if you could put that input into the chat.
Why is it not showing it?
Just as a reminder, the scale we're talking about, if you think the plan does not accomplish the goal of incorporating mixed use and creating centers of development, that would be a 1. Somewhere in the middle would be 2 or 3. Very well would be a 4. If you could put that into the chat.
No, sorry. Mm,
All right. Let's go on from there.
sorry.
Okay, so plan analysis. Let's dig a little bit deeper into how the plan changes things. Talking about, in particular, a parcel by parcel analysis of how the proposed new land use plan categories compare to current zoning. So the largest category by far here is the blue-green, and those are areas where the plan's changes relate well to the intensities of current zoning, meaning essentially that in terms of how much someone can build, how densely things can be built, it doesn't change very much. So a lot of that is single-family residential, and so that's what you'd expect. Without any changes to the single-family residential areas in the plan, there won't be changes to the density there. But there's also quite a bit of commercial zoning, which could become mixed-use zoning, and that's primarily of equivalent density. So the orange and purple categories are where proposed land use categories change intensities. Orange means that the future will be less intense. And the reason for that is that a significant amount of zoning along Bandera is currently C3, and so that's the highest commercial zoning category. What we're doing with the land use plan, what we're proposing is to pull back on those a little bit while incorporating mixed uses. So folks won't be able to build as densely as that current zoning represents, but they will be able to build developments that mix together housing and retail and office and those kinds of things. The purple areas mean that future land use could be more intense than the current zoning. And most of this is pretty minor, just a very incremental increase in proposed future land use. And that's primarily because land use categories don't align exactly with zoning categories. And so almost all related to incorporating one of the specialized mixed use categories in or near one of the development nodes shifts things just a little bit. So on the next slide, this is pretty abstract stuff. Land use is, it relates to questions of how people can use their land and translates later on into zoning. So we actually have a whole section in the report dedicated to frequently asked questions. And we thought it would make sense to hit some of those highlights here. So the first is, how does this affect my property? For the most part, it does not. If your property is a house, it absolutely does not affect your property. In fact, we've taken great care to make sure that areas close to single-family residential areas stay as lower intensity areas, so that, for example, there is not a development looming over a neighborhood. If you own commercial property along the corridor, you could benefit from the new mixed-use categories with more flexibility in how your property can be developed. For example, where you could before only put a commercial building, just retail or a restaurant or something like that. You would now be able to rezone to build something that incorporates commercial space, a restaurant, office space, and residential space all within one development. Second question, how does the land use plan impact traffic? So this is actually a really interesting question. It's pretty apparent to everyone that the traffic situation on Bandera Road is bad enough that there isn't an easy solution. So we've taken the perspective that we need to attack the problem in a lot of different ways. As we mentioned up front, there is a separate study being done by TechStock about the traffic lanes on Bandera Road itself. So they're working to improve intersections in the traffic lanes. We on the city side are working on a variety of fronts. The new land use categories should help to minimize traffic growth as development happens. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but the transportation section includes some suggestions for future study for how roadway network improvements could help Bandera traffic. And we've placed a heavy emphasis on making it easier for people to get around without cars. No one thing can solve problems, but lots of things put together can. Last question is, how does this affect Leon Valley? We've received this question a bunch. It doesn't, at least not directly. Because this is a City of San Antonio plan, it only directly affects properties within the City of San Antonio. But everybody who uses the corridor will see benefits from the things we'll talk about in the next slides. So our next question to you is a very open-ended one, and hopefully we've got a little bit more success here. What do you think about the proposed future land use plan? So talking about the future land use plan with the different categories with mixed use, replacing a lot of the straight commercial zoning. with very few changes at all, in fact, virtually none to the residential areas, and making sure that development next to the residential areas stays lower density. So this is an opportunity for you to give honest, open feedback about what you see as improvements, what you see as issues, or just your general thoughts about these things. And so you can enter text here. At least I certainly hope you can.
I don't know. I don't know why it wouldn't. It's not showing because it's set to show the results.
Right.
There it goes.
Great. So we'll hang out here for a few minutes for folks to have time to enter thoughts. And you can enter multiple thoughts here if you've got a number of different things you think about the future land use plan. Please enter all of those. Alma, I see your comment in the chat, and while we've got a second here, would like to address that. Comment is mixed uses for urban downtown areas. Doesn't seem appropriate for a thin corridor and dense residential, just zone it office. I think that's a very thoughtful comment. Please do type that in. One thing I did want to hit on is the difference between zoning and land use, because that's a tricky thing to explain. So land use is like a long-range plan that the city uses to develop zoning and to use as a model, essentially, when people go to change zoning. So there's certainly nothing about the land use plan, and especially the mixed use land use categories we're talking about, that would make it hard for someone to develop office space. In fact, that's something we encourage in the plan. There's very limited office space along Bandera now, and having a better mix of those types of uses, I think, would be very helpful. Wait just another minute or two here. Again, if you've got any thoughts, please weigh in. Thank you. I see we have a comment on proposed study for road connections. We've got actually several opportunities for feedback on that later in the presentation. Thanks for the comments. Another few minutes here. All right, there's a quick question here in the comments about a retention bond that is an easement at the entrance to Verde Hills neighborhood. So there's a difference between land use and how a property is actually used. So there is nothing that would change an existing retention pond, for example, about the land use plan. That would certainly remain what it is. So there is no impact to the neighborhood in that case. All right, Linda, let's go on to the next slide here. We've got 7 bits of feedback. Great. So preferred development patterns recommendations. If you've seen one of our previous presentations, you've heard that we're incorporating recommendations for a lot of ideas that will improve the aesthetics and the amenities along the corridor, which is one of the main things we've heard from the public is interested in improving that. So in fact, we're recommending that the city study adopting a corridor design overlay, which would include requirements for development to support transit, to implement aesthetic improvements, landscaping improvements, improvements to how buildings are designed and built, and incorporating open spaces that would improve the appearance of the corridor as well as the usability and walkability of developments themselves. We're also recommending that the city study adopting a TERS, which is a special mechanism whereby the taxes of specified properties are collected and used specifically for improvements within the area, so within the Bandera corridor. Another option is to adopt a greenway design overlay, which similarly to an overlay on Bandera would set rules for how developments are done along the creeks and greenways, which are an important part of the corridor and becoming more important every day. So as you're probably aware, there's a fair bit of vacant space along parts of the corridor right now. Our market analysis showed that that is in part because there's an oversupply of that type of space, of retail space right now. We're also recommending that the city support conversion of that space into other uses, at least until the retail market rebalances itself along the corridor. And I'd add that a fair bit of that is in Leon Valley. And of course, that is a question the city of Leon Valley could address as well. So let's talk more about development standards. What you see here is a mixed use development. So it includes housing, retail, office, and potentially light industrial uses. And this is a model that throughout the public meetings that we've had so far, we've had a lot of support for. And so that's actually one of the reasons why we'll talk about that a fair bit here. It's located near a greenway, which you can see on the right. And more importantly, it connects directly to that greenway and enhances it with internal semi-public spaces. And so that's what we call a trail-oriented development. It does the same thing with a transit stop, which is well connected into the development as well. You can also see a shared use path along the roadway there. Shared use being both bikes and pedestrians and things like that. Another important feature that we recommend is breaking up large parking lots into smaller ones and making sure that no more parking is included in developments than is really needed, including encouraging developments of different types to share parking when it's feasible. Which is a great way to minimize the amount of parking that we have out there. You can also see a stormwater detention feature here, and this is used to beautify the site. I expect that many of you have noticed how there are recent developments that have included concrete basins or depressed areas. So a lot of those are code required detention areas. They're used to temporarily hold stormwater when we get a lot of rain, and that helps control flooding, both locally as well as downstream. We recommend that instead of a concrete basin, those areas be designed either as year-round small ponds or as attractive planted areas. They don't have to hold water all the time, just when it rains. So following up on that, this question is one about priorities. And it's, what do you think is the most important? Which proposed improvement is the most important? Is it first shared use paths along Bandera and along connecting roads to Bandera? Again, those shared use paths are walkers and bikers, but a wide path, 8 to 10 feet. Is it shade and other amenities at transit stops? Is it trees and landscaping along Bandera? Fourth, is it placing parking behind buildings so that you don't have big parking lots just right there on Bandera Road? Or last option, is it incorporating open space in developments? So those 5 are the 5 key things that we're talking about in some of the changes to development patterns that we'd like to see. As we wait for folks to weigh in on this poll question. And again, if you've got any issues with getting connected to Menti or with the operation of it itself, please feel free to put that into the chat function. And I'll run through the options again. First is shared use paths along Bandera and along the roads that connect to Bandera. Is it shade and other amenities at transit stops? Third is trees and additional landscaping along Bandera, which is a comment that we've heard from the public quite a lot for more landscaping. Is it placing parking behind buildings, or is it incorporating open space into developments? And we've got some support now for both trees and landscaping along Bandera, and also placing parking behind buildings so that you're not faced with a sea of parking as you drive along the road. I see we've got a comment in the chat for none of the above. Thank you for that. We probably should have included that as an answer. Apologies. Okay, just another public transit. Thank you. So I would note that a lot of what we've talked about in the preferred development patterns is what's called a transit-oriented development. And so that's making sure that developments do things like have internal pathways that go from an office building or from apartments or restaurants or whatever happens to be in that development directly to sidewalks, shared use paths along Bandera. And for larger developments that tend to have transit stops nearby to connect directly to that transit stop, and also improving things like including shade and trash cans and benches and things like that at and around transit stops can really help the experience of using transit. Okay, so going on to the next slide here, the report has an extensive section on transportation and network improvements. Keep in mind again that the TechStock project addresses the traffic lanes themselves, so we're focused on multimodal improvements and connecting streets, sidewalks, and bicycle routes. So we have called out a number of potential projects which complete those networks. We've identified gaps in sidewalks and in bicycle routes that currently make it hard for walkers and for bicyclists to use the corridor, and especially to use it safely. That's very hard now. The TechStock project will include complete facilities for pedestrians and bicyclists on the corridor itself, which will be a major advance for Bandera Road. So they're talking about at the moment, of course, that plan is still under development, but shared use paths along both sides of Bandera Road, as well as finally completing crosswalks at the signalized intersections. But completing the other projects that we've identified further out in the corridor area will heal those bicycle networks so that people can connect to Bandera Road well, bicycle and pedestrian networks. So the other big piece here is roadway connections. The TechStock folks did a study showing improvement of traffic on Bandera Road up to 30% in some instances if there are more choices for certain types of trips, especially from the western end of the corridor over to the medical center, to USAA and areas over there. So the TechStock team identified 4 major options that have that big positive impact. So we've done a little bit of qualitative analysis, and if you'll see in the report, if you look through that, talking about some of the pros and cons of each one of those developments, each one of those possibilities. And what we're saying right now in the report is that those should be studied in detail for implementation. And those are not real projects. I just want to emphasize those are concepts. So the next slide is a question about transportation. What interests you most about that? Is it first, completing shared use paths on Bandera and connecting streets? Second, is it new greenway trails? That's another thing that we think would be a great addition to the corridor. There's additional trails along the greenways. Is it bicycle lanes on connecting streets? So those would be the streets that currently connect to Bandera Road. A lot of them don't have bicycle lanes or shared use paths or grade separated bicycle lanes. Or fourth, is it completing roadway connections to Bandera? And I will just add that we've got the next question, which is specifically about the roadway connection piece, because I know that you would like to, many of you would like to have input on that. So just going through those options again, we'll give this another minute or so. First is, are you most interested in seeing the completion of shared use paths basically wide sidewalks for bikers and pedestrians on Bandera, as well as on the streets that connect to Bandera? Are you interested in seeing option number 2, that's new greenway trails? Number 3 is bicycle lanes on connecting streets. And the fourth option is completing roadway connections to Bandera Road. We've only got one person weighed in. Alma, we see your input there. I think that's very thoughtful. We've talked a bit in the plan about potential ways for the cities and others to look at ride-sharing programs, and the commuter bus is a great thing as well. We've coordinated a lot with VIA about the potential for greater service in this area. Great, we've got 4 folks weighed in. Okay, Let's go on, I think, Linda, to our last bit of feedback as we're getting close to the end here. Drilling down specifically on the roadway connection piece. So as we mentioned before, the plan currently contains a recommendation to study roadway network connections to Bandera Road. And as we said, the TechStock study has identified traffic reductions of 30% or more, depending on which connection that is. But we also understand very clearly that people both support and oppose that. So we would like your specific feedback here. What do you see as the most significant issue in studying that connectivity? Do you see opportunities? And if so, what are those? Do you see problems? Please let us know what those are, or something else. If you just have a general thought that you'd like to share with us, this is your opportunity to do that. And you can submit multiple answers to this question as well. And we'll hang on a bit here. I know it takes a little bit longer to type than it does to choose an answer. So a comment question about flyovers at Prue, Eckert, and Huebner. I actually don't have fully up-to-date information on that. That's part of the TechStock plan, which includes potential improvements along Bandera Road itself. They've studied a number of different options. They've looked at a boulevard option. They've looked at a parkway option. I know that they are currently studying options for underpasses, for overpasses at specific intersections, as well as various ways to change flow at intersections themselves without any grade separation, just ways to move traffic through existing intersections faster. I would encourage y'all, and I think we've got links on the city website linking to the TechStock study, and I would encourage you all to go and take a look at that as well. And they've got another public meeting upcoming in September, and that's a great opportunity to participate and make your thoughts heard. More comments here. Traffic, yes. Increased transit access, absolutely, and safety. Prue needs completion from Bandera Road to Fredericksburg Road. You didn't involve the neighborhoods who you plan to, we certainly don't plan to decimate anyone. This is important feedback for us, and thank you for your thoughts. People use Bandera to get to 410 and 1604, and these changes will not affect that. You know, it was very interesting. So the TechStock group did a study using actually Bluetooth data, looking at where people are going from and where they're going to. Their assumption going into the study, as they related to us, had been that they expected a lot of people coming from, for example, Helotes into downtown. And what they found was actually not that at all. There's only about 10% of the traffic on Bandera Road that's doing that. The majority of it actually is going from areas west of Bandera Road, still inside 1604, over to the east side of Bandera Road, usually still outside of 410. So there's a lot going on with the traffic movement. If you can scroll down, thank you, Linda. Hang on a second here for some more input. The map colors on the corridor plan are inconsistent with the major thoroughfare plan from 1974. We will take a look at that. Certainly we don't want to be confusing with the information that we relay. So thank you for that comment. We will look at that. Don't like the idea of taking people's land to build new roadways, and eminent domain is related to that. I would add again, we are very far away from any such thing as that. And I know that it's something that the city takes very seriously. So thank you for your comments in that regard. Comments about the roads being two-way, adding traffic to Bandera Road. So the overall plan would be, and again, this is really the area of expertise of the TechStock team, with improvements to particularly how traffic flows through intersections. Improving roadway networks tends to reduce traffic because it gives people more choices in how they move around. One of the issues with Bandera Road now is that it is the major route from certain origin points to certain destination points and back. You basically don't have very many choices. I know there's some back ways to get from here to there. And Iris has just linked that study in the chat, so I'd encourage y'all to look at that. But no, the overall upshot there is that a better roadwork network connectivity, just citywide, not talking specifically about the Bandera Road Corridor itself, tends to reduce the load on any given corridor. Okay. Ready. Last slide here, costs and fiscal impact. So we're also interested in how this plan can impact things financially. So part of this report is a financial analysis for how changing land uses might translate to tax revenue and infrastructure costs. And that gets pretty detailed, and it's inevitably a projection, so it's an estimate. But the bottom line is that the new mixed-use categories and the development in important intersections will likely translate into higher revenues. And density has the important side benefit of reducing the relative infrastructure cost per development square foot. So overall, the future land use plan will likely involve slightly higher expenditures for infrastructure and for services. But revenues will rise at a higher rate. So that's a net overall positive picture. It's just kind of generally what the costs and fiscal impacts of the plan look like. So with that, I will turn it back over to Josh.
Thank you for the presentation, Jay. This leads us to our next steps. So next steps are to incorporate the public comments we received into a revised draft. This draft will be known as an administrative draft. Once that has been produced, we will go through the formal adoption process for any plan in the city of San Antonio, which includes taking it before Planning Commission, Planning Committee, and then ultimately City Council. Again, I did want to remind everybody that our final public meeting will be on August 24th. Be held at City Church, Bandera Road, which is at the intersection of Braun Road and Bandera. You'll be receiving some mailers sometime this week, probably before the end of the week. And I'm going to go back now and check to make sure that we didn't get any new questions. Jay, thank you so much for fielding the questions as they were coming in the chat. It doesn't look like there are any additional questions, so I'll give you a few more seconds to submit your comments into the chat box. And again, remind everybody that you can view the plan, submit comments at www.sanantonio.gov/planning/Bandera-road-corridor-plan.
Josh, at this point, while folks are considering if they want to just make a final comment in the chat or submit a question either directly to us or through the process, just on behalf of the planning department, my name is Rudy Nino. I'm the assistant director of the department. And I want to thank Iris and Josh for all of their work in making sure that neighborhood leaders stay informed of the process and have an opportunity for feedback before we go out to the general public. Jay and his team, including Linda, have done a really good job of helping us produce this plan and ensuring that we have an opportunity to go out to the public in a meaningful way. Know that your comments are very important. They're crucial. As Jay said before, they do help us drive the direction of how this plan is going to go. So please submit your comments. The other thing that we've heard throughout the process is, is there a way that we can submit comments to you directly? You may not want to do it in the chat or so forth. And if that's the case, always feel free to email us directly. We are more than happy to take your comments via email. We will follow up with you if you request a meeting. We're more than happy to do that. And then lastly, we want to thank the council office for their leadership because they've done a very good job of providing us input, giving us feedback, connecting us to folks, and just providing that level of leadership that we need to allow such a major project to move forward. So again, sanantonio.gov/planning will get you to the Bandera Road Corridor Plan webpage. and phone numbers and so forth. So feel free to reach out directly to us as well. But thank you all very much.
Yes, and before we leave you all for the night, thank you again for your time. I did mention that flyers will be sent out to homeowners in the area or homes in the area. The planning area that we sent this to far exceeds the quarter-mile boundary of our planning area. So everybody along the corridor and surrounding the corridor for a pretty significant area will be receiving those flyers. We've sent out over 34,000 flyers to solicit feedback. So we are truly looking for your feedback and looking forward to reading it and incorporating it into the plan. Thank you all. I hope you have a good night.
Mr. Mena, if you're talking to us, we can't hear you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. I think we're going to close out the presentation at this point.